Welcome to another class on fortifying your faith in a time of deconstruction. You know, we've been talking about worldviews from time to time, worldviews, our mindset. And I want to talk about two worldviews. There may be a few more, but I want to look at two worldviews that seem to dominate things. The one worldview is the Christian worldview, I'll call it that, a Christian worldview that says that God can explain everything, that we get every part of our understanding from the idea of God. And then there is another mindset we'll call the materialist, the atheist, who believes that everything is just a set of atoms and molecules that have randomly been put together by evolution. Now, currently, the materialists have a worldview that dominates society. I mean, this is the best known worldview today, the worldview that says there is no God, that we all came here by random chance and evolution. It dominates the schools, the universities, it dominates the media, it's everywhere. And we've seen what has been referred to as the new atheist. The new atheist, people like Richard Dawkins, they're aggressive. They're trying to disprove God. Dawkins, for instance, came out with a book some time ago called The God Delusion, that if you believe in God, that you're just delusional. You might put the subtitle of his book, though, There Is No God and I Hate Him. There's this aggression towards those who are believers. And this aggressive stance has caused many to conclude that science has disproved God and the Bible. And you hear young people sometimes say that, well, science has already disproved God and the Bible. Why should that be my mindset when we know that there is no God? We know that all we have is the material universe, and all we are is a grouping of cells and molecules. That's all there is. And so some have come to that conclusion that science has already proved that. I listened to Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astronomer, the other day, and he was talking about belief in God. And he said that science is based on evidence. And there is no evidence for God. That those who believe in God believe in a God that has no evidence. That's what faith is. He says faith means that you have no evidence. If they had evidence, we would call Christianity evidence rather than a faith. Of course, he wants to redefine what faith is. The Bible doesn't define faith that way at all. Hebrews 11:1 says that faith is the evidence of things hoped for, the substance of things not seen. There is an evidence that we have. There is reason for believing that there is a God. All of us agree, scientists, atheists, Christians, whoever, we all agree that the universe had a beginning. The question is, how did it begin? And the atheists will say, well, we don't know. There's no way for us to know this. They believe that no one created something out of nothing. And the Christian worldview says someone created something out of nothing. Now let me ask you this. Which worldview requires more faith? It would seem to me that it would take more faith to be an atheist than it would be to be a Christian. And not all scientists agree. And by the way, not all scientists are atheists. There are many scientists who are believers in God. In fact, much of the evidence has led a lot of people to become Christians. There are men and women in every discipline of science who are Christians. I have a friend who has a PhD in chemistry. He's taught chemistry classes at the college level. He's a member of our church. And we've asked him, well, why do you believe in God? And he says, well, I can put my Christian hat on. I can put my science hat on. I said, let me put my science hat on. Well, we go into the lab and we try to find out and understand how elements work. And we see how they work, and we experiment with all the elements. And so you say, well, how does life begin? And he says, well, we don't know. And it's not just a small jump, just a small hurdle of understanding. There's a huge, huge chasm between what they know and understanding how life began. And that's not just my friend, by the way. He brings up renowned scientists who have also come up with the same conclusion, have written books about it, who are experts about it. In fact, the more scientists discover is that the world, the universe that we live in, and including ourselves, is very, very complex. And so I want to talk about another way to fortify our faith. Last week I talked about cosmology, that we all had, everything had a beginning, the cosmological argument, the argument that comes from the beginning of the cosmos, that we know that everything began ever since Einstein's theory of relativity. We've known this to be true. And so we agree with science, we agree with atheists that the world began. We disagree when it comes to how it began. And we see great design in the universe. This complex universe, as complex as it is, shows great design. And design demands a designer. If you see a painting there, there's a great painting. You go to one of the great museums and you see a painting there. And can you imagine a painting that had no painter? We see design, we see elements of design there, and we say, well, there must be a designer. You take a book, just take any book. I happen to have my Bible sitting here, so you take a look at my Bible, and you say, well, how did this book get here? Did it happen by random chance? Well, no. We see design here. We see the words organized in a certain pattern to convey a message to us, and we know that this took a lot of effort. I mean, if I said, well, this is the result of an explosion in a print shop, we would all just laugh. If I said, well, this has happened by shaking up letters in a box and spilling the letters out, and it all came out into this book, we would all laugh, because we understand the idea, the concept of design, and that it demands a designer. Johnny, he's coming down for breakfast before school, and Alphabets is his favorite cereal. And he notices that the box has been spilt, it's turned over, and spelled out there in the Alphabets is, take out the garbage, Mom. And Johnny thinks, wow, it looks like someone's left me a message. My mom wants me to take out the garbage. But then again, I've learned in biology that things just happen by random chance. And maybe that's the reason here. Perhaps it's mindless natural laws that have taken over. Well, we understand that to have such a small sentence as that even, had to have somebody who put those letters together and made that messages. Well, let's go back to this book and let me ask you another question. Which is more complex? This book that I'm holding or a DNA molecule? Which is more complex, a book or DNA? If you take a look at the DNA of a one-cell amoeba, that one-cell amoeba has a DNA that has a message that would be the equivalent of 30 complete sets of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Even Richard Dawkins, a biologist, would tell you that. That DNA is very complex, and within it is the code, this message that would take thousands, maybe perhaps, of Britannica encyclopedias to fill. And we know that encyclopedias don't contain random letters. They contain letters that are in very specific order that try to convey a very specific message. And so if DNA is even more complex than this Bible, what would make us think that all of that complexity and all of that design could come by random natural laws? What makes us think that that did not have a design at all, had no purpose, had no reason for it at all? You know, sometimes the debate that we're talking about here has been put out as, well, this is science against the Bible. But this is not science against the Bible. This is intelligent design versus naturalism. This is good science versus bad science. This is not science against Christianity, because there's many Christians who are scientists. And the atheists want us to think that all good scientists are atheists, and that's just not true. It's just we're part of a irreducible complex system. I noticed I looked at my paper. Irreducible. I like that word. Irreducible complex system. Now, the idea of irreducible says that it's so complex that you couldn't just have one part without the other parts. If you wanted to modify a car engine in some way, you couldn't just modify the cylinders and make them larger. You'd have to also make modifications to the rest of the engine so it all would work together. And what we see in the complexities of life about us is this irreducibility, that they had to work together. You know, DNA can explain life, and they say, well, this is the beginning of life here, DNA, and we can see this code. But what the DNA does not tell us is, how did it become part of this entire system? It's like we know that a computer runs because it has computer coding in there. A computer coder went in and put all this coding in there, and now we have this computer that can work. But that doesn't explain to us how the computer itself got there or how it was made. You see, it all has to go together. It's irreducible. And we have complex systems that are well matched with every integral part of them. You know, we asked a simple question: which came first, the chicken or the egg? And I don't know which one you want to pick. I think I would pick the chicken. Well, how did the next chicken come? Well, we know the chicken laid an egg. Let me ask you this: was that egg fertilized? How did it become fertilized? It had to come from something else. You take a look at this chicken's heart. It has a heart. It pumps blood. Which came first, the blood or the heart? And how did oxygen and blood all come to work together to cause this life? It's so complex. The mathematical odds of the designs happening by chance are impossible. They are just numbers that are so large that this could actually happen by chance. Isn't it great that the universe exploded in just the right way? That the earth rotated around the sun, and that gravity was created in some fashion so that we could go around the sun at just the right speed, that we were just the right distance, because if we were any further from the sun, we couldn't sustain life. If we're any closer to the sun, we couldn't sustain life. Gravity developed to be exactly what we need to sustain life on Earth. We have the right atmosphere. Isn't it grand that everything just happened, the right atmosphere happened to come along, and that the Earth rotates just exactly at the right speed. If it did rotate any faster, we would freeze. If it went any slower, we would burn up. And as we begin to look at the complexities of each one of these items, and if we look into biology, or we look into astronomy, or if we look into any of the disciplines, what we see is these irreducible systems that rely on one another in such a way that you couldn't have one without the rest. You couldn't have this gradual, random, natural laws to explain all these things because they had to come here all at once. I remember years ago, John Clayton had a monthly newsletter, and I love getting those newsletters, but one section in there I really liked. It was a page or two on design, and it showed the designs and the complexities of different plants and animals and different things in our universe, and they were just so amazing. But one of the things that always came out in those designs is how they were irreducibly connected to something else and how they work together. I mean, we can look at the eye and the complexity of the eye to be able to focus and to be able to detect color and speed and all these things. Our eyes are just a marvelous thing. And so we look at design and we say, well, it must have a designer. I was looking at a PBS program, the public broadcast system had a program on how to refute arguments for the existence of God. Now that shows you how dominant this worldview, this atheist worldview has come when the public broadcast system thinks that we should all know how to refute arguments for the idea of God. And the young man who is leading this discussion talked about William Paisley. Now, William Paisley was a philosopher and said that, what would you think if you were walking out in the middle of a forest and you found a watch? If you found a watch, would you think, well, this has always been here? That this has happened by random chance and natural laws explain this? He said, no, what you do is you would look at this and you would see the design and the complexity of it and you say, there had to be a watchmaker. There had to be a watch designer. And this young man, he gives, I thought, somewhat of a silly argument, but he sounded so convinced of it. He says, well, you can't determine the purpose for everything. And so since we don't know the purpose of everything, we don't see the design in everything. And he happened to use our index finger. That it was, there was useless redundancy to have an index finger. What was it for? And he used the idea of picking your nose. He thought that was funny. Is that what it's for? And he said, we don't know the purposes of so many things. And some of the things that we have can be dangerous and can turn out for bad, like umbilical cord can wrap around a baby's neck as it's being born. And so you see that this redundancy and this lack of purpose. And I'm thinking, how in the world does that work? My phone, my cell phone, has a camera. And why in the world it has a spot right next to the camera for me to put my finger? And then I can turn it on and there's a code. And so I can open my phone either by facial recognition or by my fingerprint or put in a code. And so obviously there wasn't a designer here, or why would he put all these useless redundant things in my phone? Well, it really breaks down. When you have to see this much design and you have to come up with such crazy arguments. My phone, it shows that there's a designer. And design demands a designer. One of the things, I'll go back to that, I'll talk about this in a future time, but one of the things about that PBS show is the guy came out with such confidence. We know this is all ridiculous now. I mean, at one time we had William Paisley, we had Anselm, and we had all these different arguments, but we know now that these are all wrong. Well, we don't know these are all wrong. In fact, common sense would just say, look at all the world around us and all the design, and to think that just happened by random chance? That's crazy. It had to have a designer. Natural selection and natural mutations is supposed to be good science today. That's what they say. We can explain everything by natural selection and natural mutation. That's good science. That Darwin had proven how we can explain how we got here without God. Well, of course, Darwin, he looked at several of species of animals, and he said you can take a look and see how they randomly change. You have a finch, and some of these finches have big beaks that can crack nuts. Then there were some small beak finches that were able to take care and eat small, soft nuts. And so what happened is, because of where they were at, they were able to adapt to where they were. Well, I don't think anybody's arguing the idea of microevolution or adaptation. The thing is about that is those large beak and small beak finches were still finches. You take a bacteria and you say, well, here's a bacteria, and antibodies kill all these bacteria except for these few here. They're resistant to this bacteria. And so now the bacteria that has remained, and now it multiplies, and it's all resistant to this antibiotics. It has become resistant to antibiotics. Well, it's still bacteria. It hasn't changed into something else. It's a big jump from microevolution to macroevolution. Macroevolution is the idea that we started with goo and we ended up at the zoo with all these complex animals. Now, where are the intermediate and transitory creatures that should be in between all these things? We don't see those anymore. And so I just wanted to bring out these two worldviews. The one thing that an atheist cannot entertain, by the way, is the idea of God. Because once he even entertains it, that's a possibility of how the universe began. What he ceases to be is an atheist. He's now an agnostic at the least. But what he does do, and what they have done very successfully, is not disprove God, but to plant some seeds of doubt. And to fortify your faith, I just want you to know that you do not have to buy into all these atheist arguments. In fact, all you need to do, you don't have to be able to refute them all. You just have to understand why you believe. I believe because there was a beginning of everything, and God explains that better. I believe because I see design and all around me, and everything all around me, and God explains that better. There was a beginning, and there will be an end. And scientists know this. If there was a beginning, there has to be an end. Isaiah, the 51st chapter, verse 6 says, "Lift up your eyes to the sky, then look to the earth beneath. For the sky will vanish like smoke, and the earth will wear out like a garment, and its inhabitants will die in like manner. But my salvation will be forever, and my righteousness will not wane." There is eternal life. And we need to think about that and consider that there is a God, and there's more to life than what the atheists see in life. In Psalm 19, verses 1 through 3, the psalmist writes, "The heavens are telling the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of his hands. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard." He says all the design around us, we look at the universe, we look at the stars and the planet, and they're shouting, there is a God. There is a designer. Well, I guess I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Design demands a designer. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. Well, our time is short, and I don't want our lessons to go too long. Otherwise, as you might know, I'm not able to download it onto Facebook. But I hopefully have given you enough information to fortify your faith. And to say, it's not just blind faith, but there's evidence for believing. And the evidence for believing in God is much better. It's much more common sense than believing what the atheists tell us and how we got here and how we began. Well, I look forward to seeing you next time. Next week is Thanksgiving, so I'm not sure we'll have a class then, but I will see you soon. Thanks for stopping in and listening to me today. Have a great week.